Welcome back to Two Nates on Sports. My name is Nathan Kwan, and Nathan Simmons is off this week, so I'm actually joined by Evan Tenenbaum, our resident MLB expert. He's stepping in and filling in. Let's start off and talk about college football, and specifically the University of Texas against USC last night in Los Angeles at the Coliseum. It was definitely more competitive than I thought it would be. USC ended up winning 24-21 in double overtime. But Evan, what were your initial thoughts of the game?
It's weird how I come into this game with zero expectations coming off that disappointing 51 points that Maryland scored against us at home, and then beating a pushover like San Jose State. And I still come into this game with zero expectations. And you see a lot of things that Texas did right in this game. Probably the most obvious being that the defense just looks like a completely different team. Same defense that gave up 51 points to Maryland held USC, the number 4 team, one of the highest scoring offensive teams in college football. They held USC to only 17 points in regulation, which is saying something. And now one of those touchdowns that USC did get was within the last play of the first half, a 56-yard touchdown that probably shouldn't have happened while USC was trying to, I guess, get some garbage time points before the half. Still, the Texas Longhorns defense completely stepped up. It's probably the best defense I've seen from them in quite a while. Tackling was on point. We actually got USC quarterback sometimes overthinking his throws. We actually got 2 interceptions. Malik Jefferson was incredible. I just have really nothing bad to say about the defense, even though they did make crucial mistakes at the end of each half, being letting USC get that touchdown at the end of the second quarter and then allowing them to at least get in field goal range to tie it up to send it to overtime. Offense looked pretty mediocre, lukewarm. I don't think Sam Ehlinger is our answer, even though he did have a good job in we were down 14-10 and leading that drive at the very end. He had a couple of fourth down opportunities that, that's the time to step up as a quarterback, and he did. Nevertheless, he was just pretty lukewarm throughout the rest of the game. Nothing really impressed me with his game, and I think Shane Buechele is better on all ends. So when he comes back from his injury, I have no doubt that there would be a quarterback controversy in saying that Shane Buechele will probably be able to lead this offense better than Ehlinger. This offensive line also has to get so much better. It looked like the Maryland game in some spades that they're not giving Ehlinger enough time, even if he may not reach the potential of a Shane Buechele, but they're just still not giving him enough time to go out and find his open receivers and make the correct calls. There was this one drive where Ehlinger got sacked 3 times in a row. I have no idea. I've never seen an offensive line give up 3 sacks in a row. It's inexcusable at that point.
You haven't been watching the Houston Texans.
Well, yeah, that's sort of true. But I would think college football is so quarterback heavy. Their success is really reliant on their receivers getting open and having an offensive line that can just stand pat and make sure that they have the time to, either find an open receiver or if they find nothing, to scramble. And I saw way too much scrambling from Ehlinger. And if he couldn't scramble, then he was going to get stuffed. Now, you could say credit to the USC defense for winning the battle of the trenches, but this is now 2, and I would even consider the game against San Jose not the greatest offensive line game. So, they have to step up for Big 12 play coming up.
Yeah, I echo your thoughts and expectations going into the game. I honestly thought it'd be over by midway through the second quarter. But, the defense came to play. And, again, you mentioned the game against Maryland, giving up 51 points to a bottom-tier Big Ten team. Completely different unit. We saw that defensive line just dominate USC's offensive line. And USC, you mentioned that they're number 4 in the country, but Sam Darnold is a Heisman contender. Many people think he's going to be one of the top, if not the top pick in next year's NFL draft. And the Longhorns defense made him look pretty average throughout the game. You mentioned those 2 drives at the end of each half. But yeah, that Puna Ford, Charles Omenihu, Anthony Wheeler, and that front, and then linebacking. Yeah, Malik Jefferson. That was the best half of his whole career, in my opinion. That second half, he was flying around all over the place, making plays in the backfield and pass coverage. Secondary was good. Deshaun Elliott had the pick 6, and he had another interception. He had a chance for another one late in the game. So, I mean, the secondary tackling was great. Really props, I think, to the defensive coordinator, Todd Orlando. I watched a couple of those big upsets that University of Houston pulled over the last couple of years. And that defensive front, as much as UH's offense got a lot of the hype with Greg Ward Jr. Being a fringe Heisman contender, but that defense was really the reason that UH was able to elevate to a top 25 group of 5 bowl contender every year. Was the pressure that they got. And I think he called a great defensive game. Offensively, I agree with you. Offensive line it's been a problem, not just this year, but it's been the last couple of years. And I know they've had injuries up there. A couple of guys are out, but you mentioned those 3 sacks in a row. Like the right side of the line just didn't block. And then the quarterback center exchange was a problem throughout the night. I mean, there was snaps that were low. There were snaps that Ellinger wasn't ready for. Yeah, I think offense has some things it needs to build on. But one positive I do gain was the play of Colin Johnson. He really emerged as kind of the number 1 threat that Texas hasn't really had the last several years at the wide receiver position. And it seemed like every time that the Longhorns needed a big play on 3rd down or even 4th down, he came up big. And it reminded me a little bit of watching kind of DeAndre Hopkins of the Texans, just no other big receiving threats other than him. And he seems to come up with the big plays against the best corner of the other team when it matters the most.
Yeah, and I guess another thing I'd like to, mention about the offense is we're now playing 3 games, and 2 of them where the rushing has been a no factor. I still don't know what they see in Porter, but I think Chris Warren is the most underused player on that offense. I think he'd be a good complement, and if we don't know how healthy Shane Buechele will be, or if he struggles in the next coming games, maybe they'll go back to Ellinger. But I think having a consistent threat on your offense and your rushing game would be very key for, consistency in this offense. And I do think Chris Warren is the key to that.
Yeah, I totally agree. It seems like I was watching the game. I was like, Chris Warren's the guy that rushed for over 100 yards last week. He was dominant. And are they just using him every other game? And also in the second overtime, they had the ball all the way down to like the 4-yard line. And they ended up going with quarterback sneaks with Sam Ellinger. And then he ended up losing the fumble. And you would think with a big back like Chris Warren, why they wouldn't give him a shot. But I think part of that's also the offensive line, as you mentioned, not only in pass protection, but in run blocking. They weren't very good last night either. So if Tom Herman doesn't trust that offensive line to open up gaps, then he's going to go somewhere else with his play calling.
Yeah, at least they get a little bit more time to prepare. They are off next week, and then they have a Thursday night game against Iowa State. How do you see that coming out in Ames?
Yeah, well, it's too early. I mean, I haven't really looked at Iowa State so far this year, but I mean, Ames is always a tough place to play. I remember several years ago, there was a Thursday night game and UT really should have lost that game. I think they ended up getting a last-second touchdown and stole that game. But yeah, Iowa State's a team that's bottomed here in the Big 12, and I think going forward, this team needs to build on the success it had last night and improve on the things that weren't so good, but also the defense needs to continue to play like that because it can't be Jekyll and Hyde. One game's like Maryland, one game's like last night, because there's a lot of good offenses in the Big 12, mainly the 2 Oklahoma schools. And for the Longhorns to be contenders in the Big 12 conference this year, they need to ride that defense to success.
And you'd have to think that being able to handle USC's potent offense with the defense, that you would have to feel optimistic about that. But then you also think about how they got manhandled by Maryland's offense, and you really do have to wonder which defense is going to come out. And seasons with Texas would make you think it's the Maryland defense that would come out. So, I mean, I don't want to stay too optimistic here, but, we have, the rest of the schedule to figure out what kind of defense the Texas defense wants to be.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, let's move on to some baseball talk. So a lot of things happening this week, namely the Cleveland Indians. We'll get to that in a bit, but let's start off and talk about the Texas Rangers. They're really struggling. They're on a losing streak right now, and it seems like their wild card hopes are on life support at this point.
Yeah, they have 14 games left, and they are 5 games back of Minnesota, who currently owns the second spot. Things are not looking great in the wild card standings, and a lot of frustration is going around in the fandom right now. I would personally like to say, I guess, that I don't have expectation for this team to make the playoffs. They would need to be getting sweeps at this point. They went on this homestand against the Yankees in Seattle, two teams that are contending for the wild card. They went 2-5 against them. They're currently playing their Angels series, and they've lost both games against them where the offense suddenly decided to disappear. This is not the same team that was, in the later part of August and the first week of September actually playing like a legitimate wildcard contender. So things are a little bit tough in Rangers camp so far. It's something you can dissect every which way and say, since we didn't have this happened, or we didn't have this. It's more of a microcosm of how the season really turned out. It was Jekyll and Hyde the entire way. You would have, Jonathan Lucroy, which used to be one of the best catchers in the game, have one of the worst years of his career. And, you can handle that because you have a guy like Robinson Chirinos, who has now had the Rangers record for catchers, most consecutive games on base, and he's at 29 and counting right now. Having Lucroy have such a bad year doesn't hurt as bad when we have Robinson Chirinos having his, breakout offensive year. Then you have someone like Mike Napoli, who we knew was going to be slowing down in the later part of his career, hit sub 200 for most of the year, but he still hits a lot of homers. He's now relegated to a part-time role. He has come out in the media this week understanding that he's not going to be an everyday starter anymore. He's passing off the torch, so to say. But you can handle that too, because you got Joey Gallo, who's finally starting to come into his own. He's, not exactly hitting for average, but he's definitely taken a different approach to the plate. He doesn't strike out as often as he did earlier in the year. He's still mashing homers like anybody's business. And, he's an actual legit threat on the base paths. And he's, an above average fielder. So he's definitely taken that to heart. If he can get his average up to maybe 230, 235, 240, I mean, he's a legit all-star contender, whether that be at first or third or left field. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how he develops in the next 2 weeks and, if he become an all-star next year. So that's just two cases of good things. The rest of this team has just been severely disappointing. We got Miguel Gonzalez at the waiver trade deadline. He's been garbage as a starter, kind of unexpected because he'd been, a pretty decent bottom of the rotation. You need him to play well on the back end of your rotation, and he hasn't. Then the other back of the rotation spot has just been a bunch of fill-ins who have really had mixed results. Cashner had his first bad game in 3 months. I can't really blame him on that. He's been pitching great, ever since the end of June. Hamels and Perez and Cashner just were not enough to save this rotation. And, you can partially blame Darvish playing just well enough that we can trade him, and then he craps the bed with the Dodgers. I don't know if Darvish would have saved this team. Possibly. Who knows? So Rangers got their work cut out for them in the coming offseason to see how they can salvage something in this rotation. Bullpen, that's the story of the Rangers season. Like, so many things went wrong, and I guess the bullpen was the final straw on the back. You can't have, half your bullpen suddenly lose all their talent and have fill-ins that are maybe 23, 24, 25 fill-in on the back end. So it's frustrating. And it all came to an end, I guess you could say. They're technically still in it, but I just don't have much hope that this Rangers team can pull up sweeps in the next 2 weeks in order to get back in this contention.
Yeah, it looks like they just kind of hit a wall. You mentioned the first week of September and then the last couple of weeks of August, it looked like they were charging forward, but Seattle had their number this week and pitching just kind of fell apart. And then the offense this weekend in Anaheim has fallen apart too. But let's talk about the Astros. So they haven't been playing the best of late. We recorded midway through them getting 4 games swept in Oakland last weekend, where it was just completely horrific offense, horrific defense, horrific pitching. But they turned it around. They won 2 out of 3 in Anaheim. And yesterday they got their 98th win, which is the first time the Astros have reached that plateau since 2004. Right now they're playing the Mariners. Justin Verlander's starting. And the magic number's 1. So by the time you listen to this, they might be the official 2017 American League West champs. But just kind of notes on the team. You got pitching and offense have kind of struggled down the stretch. Justin Verlander has been the ace. Dallas Keuchel, you would hope, would be the number 2 starter going into the playoffs. But after that, AJ Hinch has his work cut out for him, who's going to round out the rest of that rotation, because Lance McCullers, as talented as he is, he just cannot stay healthy. This is the 3rd consecutive year he's missed multiple games. due to injury. He came back from the disabled list, had a good start in Seattle, but was scratched from his last start because of arm fatigue. He's going to miss his next start as well due to that same arm fatigue. I would say at this point, there's a greater than 50% chance that Brad Peacock's the game 3 starter in the playoffs for this team, because I just don't think you can depend on Lance McCullers to be there. And even if he is healthy, what is his level of performance going to be that you can trust him in that pivotal playoff game? That's a problem for a lot of guys, that they just can't stay healthy, and attendance is part of the grade with professional athletes. And I mean, hopefully down the road he can get this fixed, but it doesn't look like that way right now. Colin McHugh, he's going to be returning. He missed a start because of a middle finger problem. If Peacock's the third starter, I would say McHugh or Charlie Morton will be the fourth starter. But another injury note was Jake Marisnick. He broke his thumb. He's going to be out for 6 to 8 weeks, which probably means he's done for the year, which makes the Cameron Maybin trade at the waiver deadline even more important, because he's a speed guy off the bench, can fill in as an outfielder, right-handed bat with some power, basically what Marisnick provided. The rest of the guys on the offense have kind of struggled. Altuve has still been the MVP level, but Carlos Correa has kind of struggled since coming off this disabled list. So they're just trying to get the core Springer and Reddick and Bregman. I mean, all those core guys that you need in the middle lineup to be on fire heading into the postseason. With the Indians winning all those games, it looks like the Astros will probably be the 2 seed at this point. They trail Cleveland by 1.5 games for the home field advantage with 2 weeks to play. And that will set up a matchup with the Red Sox in the first round. And having to face Chris Sale, I mean, the Astros have struggled against left-handed starters this year for whatever reason. So we'll preview that as that comes up. But right now, I guess good vibes that this team will win a division for the first time in 16 years. It's just they need to be picking up things up on the offensive side as we head to the end of the season.
Yeah, well, congrats to the Astros, even though this technically is preemptive, but I doubt that the magic number will not go down at some point in the season. I do see the concerns that are going to be heading into the playoffs. You have a very difficult matchup ahead of you, and the Boston Red Sox, or, and even if you do catch up to Cleveland, whatever wildcard team comes out will be, a difficult matchup to come out to. And I think that rotation past Verlander and Keuchel, someone needs to come out and surprise you. Someone needs to come out and throw the game of his life in the next 2 weeks to give you that confidence to start him in game 3. Sometimes that's the do or die game. And, if your starters aren't the ones that give you the game of their life in game 1 or game 2, you're going to have to rely on that game 3 guy. And so whether that be Charlie Morton or McHugh or McCullers or whoever comes out of that, you want to see someone like that to surprise you in the next 2 weeks. So if I were to look out for that. But the offense is fine. I don't think you'll see a problem out of it. I think Cameron Maybin's been an incredible find for you at the waiver deadline to fit right there in the outfield where I guess Nori Aoki used to be, and then being able to fill out the rest of that incredible potent offense is definitely something you'll have to take advantage of. And if y'all end up playing the Boston Red Sox and David Price is healthy, you'll just know that's an automatic win there because he can't win in the playoffs. So I say good luck to the Astros playoffs, while the Rangers will go ahead and try and at least take the Lone Star Series by sweeping y'all coming up next week.
All right. Well, let's talk about, I guess, some other things around the league. Cleveland Indians, holy cow, 22-game win streak finally got snapped on Friday night against the Kansas City Royals, but the Houston Rockets went through a 22-game win streak back in 2008, and that was incredible. But I think to do it in baseball is much more difficult than the NBA because of the variability and the starting pitching and guys getting hot or cold. And I mean, if you just run into a really good starting pitcher on the other team, your streak could end that easily. But I mean, what did you make of that run by Cleveland?
Well, first of all, congrats to Cleveland. That's an insane record that I don't know when the next time it'll be broken. And then I guess that's how it lays my feelings on that is, you go back to Moneyball era with the Oakland Athletics, who ended up pulling a 20-game winning streak and ended up meaning nothing because they got booted in the playoffs. Also to say that they didn't even win their division because they were also against the 116-win Mariners team, which also lost in the playoffs. So that didn't matter either. Anyway, my point is the streak is incredible, but when you look at it in perspective, like it just caps off their incredible season that, lets them win the division and lets them manhandle, I guess. This AL Central wasn't exactly that great this year. We still have the Twins and the Royals, I guess, in the wild card chase, but they did beat up on the White Sox and the Tigers for a large majority of this season. That's not to say that this winning streak doesn't mean anything. It gives a definite light to the fans of Cleveland who, maybe at this point are going towards a disappointing Cleveland Browns season, but at least they have something to look forward to in this Indians team that, went to the World Series last year and are, probably favorites at this point to get back to the World Series. So, I mean, I would props to, I guess, the entire Cleveland rotation. Corey Kluber, probably the Cy Young this year.
Definitely.
Leading it. And I would even throw in the rest of the people in the rotation being able to sustain themselves, throw out pretty good games, quality starts for 4 turns in the rotations in a row. I mean, that's insane. And then I guess that offense being able to know where the score is at and being able to overcome it. A lot of the last couple of wins were walk-offs. Francisco Lindor had one of them. That's some acts of heroism, right there. Like, I know I bagged this year about Francisco Lindor being overrated and Elvis Andrus having a better year than him, but I don't know if Elvis Andrus would have even been able to do what Lindor did during the winning streak. So
yeah, another person that was added at the trade deadline was Jay Bruce. He's been huge for them in the middle of that lineup, and he was key in some of those walk-off wins. But also the way they were winning, it was just the first part of the first, I guess, 2 weeks of that win streak. They were blowing teams out. It wasn't even close in some of those games, and I mean, you just don't see that level of domination that many days in a row by a baseball team.
Yeah, and you said it true. Baseball is definitely more of a game of chance or variability or probability than the other sports. I mean, you look at the NBA when you have these dominant Golden State, Cleveland, San Antonio teams that could probably pull off 10-plus game winning streaks all the time. Or, NFL, if you have, a dominant team like the 2007 New England Patriots or the 72 Dolphins or the 86 Bears or something like that. Those are the ones that put up the long winning streaks. You get maybe once a decade where a team can get 15 or more. Like 15 itself is hard.
Right.
Cleveland went further than that, got to 22. That's an eighth of a season. Like, think about that. An eighth of a season where they didn't lose one game. It's incredible. But they gotta put the money where their mouth is and win in the playoffs and don't give up a 3-1 lead in the World Series.
Yeah, that's for sure. Let's talk about the National League races. So the Nationals clinched the National League East this past week. That division was really over in seems like June. The rest of those teams weren't very good. But the Dodgers, they went through a stretch where they won, I believe it was like 50 of 60 games or something like that. And then the beginning part of this month, they really struggled, and they seem to have picked it up. They've won 4 in a row, but just, I guess, talk about some of the teams in the National League and their ebbs and flows in September.
Yeah, I'm really not liking this Dodgers team anymore all of a sudden. I don't know. When Yu Darvish got traded to the Dodgers, he had, pitched the first game, 7 innings, 10 strikeouts, pretty much normal Yu Darvish stuff. And then he really struggled in the next 5, 6. And I guess his last start was pretty good, but you expected Yu Darvish to be your number 2 guy behind Clayton Kershaw, and basically you score 1 run on the offense, you probably are good to go. But this Dodgers team was completely struggling, and I guess they had ended up losing, 8, 9, or 10 games in a 12-game stretch, which doesn't sound to me like a playoff team. Now, they are going to end up making the playoffs, but if they don't end up getting some consistency in these final 2 weeks, I could see them losing in the first round. I'm really impressed with some of these wildcard teams, specifically Arizona, how well they've been playing kind of in the background.
JD Martinez has been great.
Yeah, Zach Greinke, the ace that he was supposed to be. Really, I just think that whoever comes out of that wild card game, whether it be the Diamondbacks or Rockies or whoever's going to maybe come back up in the NL Central, is a legitimate threat to the Dodgers.
Yeah, let's talk about the Central. So the Cubs have won 5 in a row, and so I guess they've opened back up a 4-game lead. But just talk about, I guess, Milwaukee and St. Louis. They seemingly have kind of hung in there the whole year and they're marginal contenders at this point, but I mean, still a pretty good year for those 2 teams.
I mean, I personally think it's a crapshoot. Schwarber has had a completely disappointing year for the Cardinals, yet it seems like the Cardinals work their devil magic and are able to come up from, I guess, where they really didn't do anything during the trade deadline, but being able to hang in there.
Yeah, they traded away Mike Leake, which is strange. It seemed like they were selling, but I mean, they've still. But I guess St. Louis is. I picked them to make the playoffs at the beginning of the year, so I guess you could view them as kind of a disappointment. But Milwaukee, that's been a real surprise. And granted, their run differential isn't good, so I guess they've kind of overperformed given their standings. But I mean, that's a young team, and I mean, looking ahead to 2018, 2019, you would expect Milwaukee to be right there with the Cubs.
Yeah, and I do agree with that. I honestly, I'm afraid of this happening where the Brewers are pulling a 2015 Minnesota Twins, where that Twins team was in wildcard contention for quite a while. They pulled out at the end by missing by a couple games, and then their next year they were awful. Everything regressed on that side, and I'm afraid the Brewers might do that, just depending on what gives. You never know. I mean, Corey Knebel is a great closer, but who knows if he'll be consistent next year. They have a very youthful team coming up, but prospects aren't, they don't always pan out. So who knows what will happen. And I feel like they are a candidate for regression next year, or they have a candidate for being the NL Central team next year. I have no idea how to really judge this Brewers team. Nevertheless, they are still in the wild card race. I just don't think they can compete with the Cubs, who have seemed to find themselves, and the Cardinals, who have the devil magic in them.
I guess we're 2 weeks out from the playoffs, and we'll talk about previews when the playoffs start. But if I gave you the Dodgers and the Indians or the field, who would you take?
I'm taking Indians right now. Like I said, the Dodgers have shown a complete lack of consistency in the last 3 weeks, where I'm even thinking the wildcard team could beat them. And the field is good, but not great. Nothing to the Indians level right now.
Okay, well, we shall see. Also released this past week was the 2018 Major League Baseball schedule. The Astros and Rangers will renew their rivalry, the opening series of the year, March 28th to April 1st, a 4-game set in Arlington. The schedule changed a little bit to open up on a Thursday to accommodate more off days throughout the year, but all Astros Rangers meetings before the end of July, so that's a little bit of a quirk. And then the Rangers end the season with a lot of road games.
Yeah, so I'm not really a big fan of this schedule. Yeah, I understand the whole idea of trying to get more off days, specifically on converting a lot of 3-game series to maybe a 4 and a 2 or something like that. But it looks so asymmetrical, the schedule. And you pointed to a couple of the different issues with it. We're starting with a 4-game series at the beginning of the year, starting on a Thursday. Funny enough, everybody is starting on opening day for the first time in, I think it's 60 years or something like that. So that's kind of interesting to make opening day an actual event. I may actually take a work off for that. But that's really where the interesting things stop. We're looking at our interleague games where only 2 series are actual 3-game series, and the rest of them are either home and homes or a 4-game series. That's kind of weird to me. And then I guess one specific issue I have regarding the Houston and Texas series is, beside the fact that all of them will be over before July, for the Rangers home games, it's a 4, a 4, and a 2. Like, where's the consistency in that? I do think there's some psychological factor in playing a team 3 times versus 4 or 2. And I just find that weird that you wouldn't have one 3-game series against, a team that you play so often every year at home. So I find that weird, other than, playing all of those games before the end of July, where, a injury on one team that takes, a player out for half of a season, that affects how these games are played. And then it can also affect, how a team would act at the trade deadline. If both Houston and Texas is in it coming up to that last series, it doesn't really matter like what you would do to get one up on your rival, because you're not going to play them after July. So I found that really weird.
Yeah, and then in terms of interleague, the American League West, I guess, is playing the National League West from next year. So it's going to be the Dodgers, Giants, Padres, the Rockies, and the Diamondbacks, who the Astros play every year anyways, because that's their quote-unquote interleague rival now with the realignment. But yeah, take a look at that, plan your road trips, and if you want to see your team on the road next year, because the 18 schedule is out. But let's move on to the NFL, and I guess let's talk often talk about the Dallas Cowboys. They looked pretty good last Sunday night against the Giants.
It's good to get the monkey off the back. After going 13-3 last year, 2 of those losses being against the Giants, it's good to finally beat the Giants for the first time in 2 years. So that was good to see. I guess specifically about the game, I have no idea whether to judge this Cowboys defense as being dominant or this New York Giants offense being awful without Odell Beckham. I don't know how really else to put it. Like this defense took a level in badass this year. DeMarcus Lawrence had 2 sacks. Anthony Brown was very good in the nickel. He even had an interception coming off that. Tyron Smith and Sean Lee looked like a completely awesome duo in the linebackers position. Both of them coming off the ball really good, packing the box. Jalen Smith, even though he was in limited snaps, was able to do the job that we expected him to do when we drafted him last year, even though he was hurt for so long. Nolan Carroll, I guess, was considerably all right as at corner, coming off his years with the Eagles. And Skandrick looked really good before he got hurt, and that may be an issue coming up in the next couple of weeks. But with Anthony Brown behind him, my concerns aren't that bad. Like I said, the offense was pretty solid. I think there were a lot of opportunities for this Cowboys team to have scored a lot more based on how they played. I don't want to hammer them too hard because it is the Giants D that was making its usual reigns. Jason Pierre-Paul on the line. Specifically giving the left side a little bit of issues. But in the end, they played pretty well. Dak Prescott made not that many mistakes. He wasn't that great as a passer. And he didn't throw an interception. He did make the passes that he was supposed to. It also helps having, Jason Witten, one of the greatest tight ends ever, on the line there for him. And he had Ezekiel Elliott, who wasn't suspended, and he got fed, and he was able to run the ball effectively and keep that New York Giants D on the field. And I think that was where this team won, was that time of possession, was able to keep the Giants D on the field and keep them gassed and really wear them down. And it's not like they scored that many touchdowns, but they had the ball so often. It was like we should have scored more than they really had. So I was thoroughly impressed with this Cowboys team. I assume you watched the game as well.
Yeah, I caught bits and pieces. I think what you mentioned, is the Cowboys defense legit, or is the Giants offense just really bad? I think it's a combination of both. Yeah, I mean, you did mention Odell Beckham being out, but also, I mean, we'll talk about the Texans offensive line in a bit, but that Giants offensive line was a complete mess. And that, if they don't fix that, it's not going to be good for Eli Manning this year. He's not a mobile guy. If they don't give him protection, he's not going to be able to get the ball down the field to his receivers. So, the Giants, they have a good defense, but they're not going to make the playoffs if they don't fix that offensive line.
Yeah, and I think they need their offensive threats to step up. They drafted Evan Ingram, who was doing a pretty decent job on the back half of that game, but Brandon Marshall was a complete no-show. And I guess the other, Sterling Shepard, he was basically the main target of Eli Manning. And I mean, if Sterling Shepard's really the guy that we're supposed to cover the most, then you don't have that many weapons behind you. Their rushing was a no factor at all, along with Brandon Marshall. And I think they desperately need Odell Beckham back and healthy.
Yep, that's definitely true.
So as far as Cowboys, their next game is against the Denver Broncos, coming up in like an hour or two. By the time this podcast out, they'll probably be over. But I guess things you need to watch out for. Cowboys are probably going to play a very similar defense than the one they played the Giants. I would maybe argue that the Denver Broncos defense is a little bit better, but kind of a different side on the offense for Denver. You got an unproven quarterback in Trevor Siemian, and his unproven backup in Paxton Lynch, who probably doesn't have the pedigree of someone like Eli Manning, but I do think that they have better weapons in the Denver offense than what the Giants have. That rushing defense is going to be very, very tough. They're going to need really Jalen Smith again to step up, even in limited reps. Him and Sean Lee need to be the ones that are going to be reading that rushing offense and being able to stop. And if they can do what they did against the Giants, I think they'll have success. Corners will have their hands full with Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, all those guys, all those weapons that the wide receivers in Denver. So I think they may have a little bit more of a tough time on the defensive end. And, I think it's just the game plan for the offense is pretty much same as always. Feed Zeke the ball, eat up that time of possession clock, and make sure that you have your open receivers, and because they're the ones that can make the plays. Jason Witten, Cole Beasley, and Des Bryant, who was kind of hindered on against the Giants last week, and now he'll have Aqib Talib on him this week. And I guess you just got to wait for Des Bryant to have his breakout game, and I could see it happening this week. So a little bit tougher matchup. I still think the Dallas Cowboys have the talent to win this game. It's a road game, so it might be a little tough, and I don't know how impressed I'll be with this team if they end up losing close, but I could also see that happening too.
I got the Cowboys winning, if that means anything.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate your support, and of course I'm going to be rooting for the Cowboys to win. It's just this is a little bit tougher matchup for basically every aspect except the quarterback.
The way Denver's defense just kind of let Phillip Rivers throw the ball around in the fourth quarter last Monday night, and they barely held on for the win. They had to block the field goal for the tie, but yeah, I got Dallas in this one. Let's move on to the Texans. It was a horrible start to the season last Sunday. They lost 29-7 to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I harped on the offensive line all throughout preseason, and I mean, it seemed like they weren't listening to me. I don't know why. But basically, the Texans' offensive line has been an issue the last several years, and it just hasn't been addressed year after year in free agency, year after year in the draft. And basically what we're looking at now is an offensive line that, if not the worst, it's among the worst 3 in the NFL. They gave up 10 sacks to Jacksonville last Sunday, 6 in the first half. Tom Savage, who's been your quarterback that you've been hyping, oh, it's his opportunity, it's his team. He's been in this system for 4 years. He's ready. DeAndre Hopkins said he's my guy. And then you put him out there and he doesn't even get a chance. Granted, I mean, he was slow getting the ball out, but I kind of feel bad for him. He lost his starting job basically because the offensive line was so terrible, not giving him protection. I mean, other than that, opening day was also not good for the defense. I mean, Blake Bortles looked good. Leonard Fournette looked like an all-pro out there in his first NFL start. And the Texans got pushed around defensively. J.J. Watt said he played horribly, and it just wasn't good opening day. They did bounce back on Thursday night as they beat the Bengals 13-9. I don't know how much of that is the defense just bounced back and was much better, or just Andy Dalton and the Bengals offense is historically awful. Bengals haven't scored an offensive touchdown in the first 2 games of the year.
They already fired their offensive coordinator because of that.
Yeah. Andy Dalton is just, I mean, he's from the Houston area, Katy High School, shout out, but he's not a good NFL quarterback. He's good when everything around him is perfect protection, good running game, good receivers. But if he has to make plays for that team, he can't do it. And I think the Bengals have kind of realized that. And I don't know what's going to happen with that team and Marvin Lewis, but that's for them to deal with. As far as the Texans, Deshaun Watson, so he replaced Tom Savage in the second half of the Jacksonville game, and he played his first NFL start on Thursday against the Bengals, and he's been good and bad. I mean, that's what you expect out of a rookie quarterback, but what he instantly brings is the pocket presence and elusiveness that Tom Savage doesn't have back there. He's getting the ball to DeAndre Hopkins, which is something that Brock Osweiler struggled with, that Savage struggled with last year, and those two have been connecting. I mean, he's still making mistakes. He's throwing balls up for grabs sometimes, not reading the defense correctly. That will come with time, and so there's some encouraging things that we've seen from Watson. Of course, his 49-yard rushing touchdown at the end of the first half was the only touchdown of the game on Thursday night, and that was an impressive run that we haven't seen out of a quarterback in Houston ever. And so that's the good. Again, the offensive line was a little bit better on Thursday, but part of that was because they were going with a lot of 6 and 7 linemen in the game at the same time. And so when you're just over numbering the other team, you're going to open up some more lanes. But yeah, again, Dwayne Brown is not going to be in the team. He's probably not going to show up at this rate until week 9 when if he doesn't show up then his NFL service time won't count for this year, and he would lose a lot of contract incentives that way. So, but every position on that line. Kendall Lamb is an undrafted tackle. He's not an NFL quality player. Xavier Su'a-Filo, left guard, another second round Houston Texans draft bust. We could have had Derek Carr, and we took Xavier Su'a-Filo instead. And there's been all pro linemen selected after Su'a-Filo as well. So that's a complete bust. Center Nick Martin, he looks like he's a pretty solid lineman, and he's going to be in an NFL for a long time. But then the rest of the guys are veteran castoffs and Jeff Allen and Bracco Giacomini. So, I mean, in the end, I still think this team with Deshaun Watson, with that defense, they're going to be about where they were last year, 7 to 8 wins, maybe 9. This team, again, doesn't have a first or second round pick next year. So they really need to try to win every game this year, because there's no benefit to them tanking if this offensive line forces them to fall apart into like a 3-13, 4-12. They traded those picks to Cleveland, A, to get Deshaun Watson, and B, to get rid of Brock Osweiler. So this team, they're kind of stuck. They have to win, and I don't think they have the pieces to be contenders this year, but that's the boat that they're in. But that offensive line, somebody's got to fall for it. And we've been calling for Rick Smith's head, the general manager, for several years. It still hasn't happened. We'll see if the owner, Bob McNair, makes a change. But I can't express to you how frustrating it is watching that unit just completely destroy any opportunity your offense has to move down the field.
Yeah, and we mentioned it before when we were talking about the Longhorns, how similar, how make or break your team can be with your offensive line playing the way that they're supposed to be. I personally think that y'all pull the plug on Tom Savage too early. Obviously, it's a popular pick to go with the hot new rookie quarterback and maybe to get butts in seats. But I don't know how that really is going to go forward with Deshaun Watson being your starter now. Do you have any, concerns with him coming up?
Yeah, that's another talking point. Bill O'Brien, he was hired to be the quarterback whisperer, and he's gone through 8 different starting quarterbacks in 3 years. And this is the exact same thing he did 2 years ago when you went through the whole preseason. You're like, oh, Brian Hoyer's my guy. And then 1 half into the year, you bench him for Ryan Mallett. And then they flip-flop between Hoyer and Mallett throughout the rest of the year. Bill O'Brien, I can't read into what he's thinking in his head, but it seems like he just makes kind of some rash decisions sometimes where he doesn't think through the long-term ramifications, and he just says, oh, this isn't working, I need to make a change. So, yeah, that's another concern. And, I mean, Bill O'Brien, he and Rick Smith, the general manager, they don't really like each other. I mean, they won't say that publicly, but there's definitely been enough rumors and reporters that have said that those two don't see eye to eye on a lot of issues, and just kind of a mess of an organization if the front office and the head coach can't get along. My one concern about using Deshaun Watson, I guess, is the offensive line, right? So we saw David Carr, our first ever pick in 2002 in the expansion draft. His career got ruined by a horrible offensive line. And granted, Deshaun Watson does have more escapability, and he can escape the rush and run away from pass rushers. But for a young quarterback, you need to have that line to protect him, and that's one reason why Dak was so successful last year, right? Because you have the running game, you have the offensive line, you have the offensive weapons, and it makes Dak's job a lot easier. And right now, Deshaun doesn't have that. And I don't know how that's going to affect his development down the line, but the first couple of years in the league are really crucial for a quarterback, and you can ruin them for the long term if you're not careful. And then another note is Brian Cushing suspended 10 games for performance in handling drugs. He's had a good career as a Houston Texan, but now we don't know how much of that was legitimate, how much of that he was cheating under. I think at this point his career with the Texans is done. I mean, he's already been a declining linebacker the last several years, and I don't see him coming back next year, especially when you drafted Zach Cunningham to replace him. So good riddance to Brian Cushing. Okay, let's talk briefly on soccer. So MLS, both Texans teams are not looking good at this point. They've both dropped below the red line for the playoffs. They're both sitting 7th and 8th, 38 points. The Dynamo have lost back-to-back games, 1-0 to Colorado and then San Jose. Offensively, they're not connecting in the final third. I don't know how much of that is due to just the players that keep getting called up to Honduras for the World Cup qualifying and then they're having to come back and a lot of travel. But the top 3 of Kubo, Albert Feliz, and Romel Kyoto are not producing goals for the team. And goal for this year for the Dino was to make the playoffs, coming off 3 straight years where they missed it. And for the whole year, they've been in the top 6 in the West, but they have dropped below that. And so we'll see if they can rally with 6 games to play to make the playoffs. FC Dallas, I mean, we've been talking about their collapse ever since the end of May, but they got torn apart in Atlanta last weekend, 3-0. And then last night they couldn't score a goal against the Sounders at home. So, I mean, we keep waiting for all that talent on that team to come back together, whether or not like Kellen Costa, his travel with the U.S. men's national team, and they have a lot of guys that have been with World Cup qualifying, whether or not that's kind of destroyed FC Dallas's chances this year. But they're not looking good either going down the stretch. They play Minnesota next week. U.S. men's national team, we talked about their important match with Honduras several weeks ago. Didn't get to this last week, but they barely escaped Honduras of a 1-1 draw. And it was pretty much undeserved. They were dominated throughout. If you look at the stats, they were outshot, outpossessed, and they got a lucky goal in the end off a free kick from Kellen Acosta. Bobby Wood got an equalizing goal in the 75th minute, but the U.S. is now 4th in the Hex, and there's only 2 matches left. So they basically need 2 wins to assure their shot at clinching World Cup qualifying. Otherwise, they're going to have to play that playoff against the team from the Asian Federation. And this is really bad. There's a rant by Fox Sports' Alexi Lalas, which he basically calls out a lot of players on the team. But the way soccer has grown in this country and the momentum it's gotten the last several World Cups, the U.S. men's national team is integral to that in the U.S. And if they don't qualify for the World Cup, that's going to set back soccer so bad. And so this is crunch time for the team. And every one of those players, whether it's those veterans and Tim Howard or Clint Dempsey, Josie Altidore, Michael Bradley, or those young guys, Christian Pulisic, Darlington Nabby, they need to step up because they can't afford not to qualify for the World Cup. That's plain and simple. They don't play in a tough region in CONCACAF. They have Mexico, Costa Rica's a pretty decent team, but after that, you should be beating teams like Panama and Honduras. This just is unacceptable the way they've been playing, and they have 2 more matches to fix what they've done going into Russia next year. But yeah, this is not good for the U.S. men's national team, and they need to step it up.
The way you're describing it to me, and by the way, you know, I'm a pretty casual soccer watcher. I don't have that much vested interest in the MLS or you know, Premier League or anything. But the way you're describing to me is if they have the opportunity to have to go to a playoff game to in order to World Cup qualifying, that doesn't give you much, I guess, hope or inspiration for how well they may even play in the World Cup next year. Personally, like I know that's the one thing in every 4 years where no matter where you go, everybody's going to be watching it without a vested interest in soccer. But if the U.S. men's national team isn't there, you're right. Like there's going to be more people like me who probably don't care about soccer except once every 4 years. I don't want to necessarily contribute to that problem, but something else has to give.
Yeah. And I will say how you qualify, as long as you qualify in the end, that's all that matters. We looked at 4 years ago, Mexico got really lucky. They struggled to qualify, but then when they got to Brazil, they played really well and they got to the round of 16 and all was well in Mexico land. But the way that they've struggled is just, it's infuriating. I mean, the team has not made strides. Every 4 years, we look at, can this team take the next step? Can this team take the next step? And I mean, they got to the round of 16 in 2010 in South Africa. In 2014, they got out of that group of death with all those good teams in Portugal and Germany. And it was like up on the up and up. And what they've done the last 4 years is they've gotten rid of their coach and they've developed these young players. I mean, Christian Pulisic is playing in the Bundesliga. That's one of the top leagues in the world. But they just haven't had enough growth from more depth guys on the team. And then the veterans who are supposed to be the leaders, they haven't been playing well at all. And I mean, some of that is just age at this point, but also this is their opportunity to make their last statement on the world stage before they retire. And they're not taking advantage of that right now. Let's move on to shoutouts.
I guess shout out to the beginning of the training camp for the National Hockey League. That'll, I guess, go on for the next 3 weeks before the beginning of the year in October. Now that I live in a city with an actual hockey team, maybe I'll go out and support the Canes a little bit. Stars, looking pretty good coming into training camp this year. They kept hearing from the press about how they won the offseason, and now it's time for them to really show that last year was an aberration and they should be, a high playoff contention team in the Western Conference. And then I guess the dark horse in that Western Conference would be this new Vegas Golden Knights team taken from expansion draft, and it'll be interesting to see how well they do in their first year. The Stars actually get to play Vegas as the opening game in October, so that'll be fun to see. So shout out to some national hockey, and then shout out to Cole Beasley, who was a pretty consistent threat in the game against the Giants last week, but on a 3rd and long opportunity had a football bounce off of his back, and he actually reached back and kind of pinned it to his back as he was coming down. And an incredible catch. I mean, I guess something that you really haven't seen someone where they would pin the football to their body since, like a David Tyree in the Super Bowl kind of thing. But I was thoroughly impressed with Cole Beasley's handwork there. So shout out to him. I guess shout out to the BMW championship that's going on right now as we're recording. Mark Leishman looks like he's got a 4-shot advantage, and he's in the middle of his round right now. He probably should win. Ricky Fowler in second right now probably going to end up getting cut after having kind of a disappointing year. Jordan Spieth right now is tied for 5th. His round is just about done. He's probably not going to win, but considering who's right behind him in the FedEx Cup standings, he actually may gain ground here. So shout out to, I guess, the BMW championship and Mark Leishman, who probably takes a significant jump in the standings if he wins this.
Yeah, Tour Championship next week in Atlanta, right?
Yep, and I guess sometimes it's the winner of that maybe ends up winning it. And I guess just depending on, how Dustin Johnson and how Justin Thomas may end up playing next week, Jordan Spieth may not even have to win in order to win the FedEx Cup. Who knows? I guess Jordan Spieth has played well enough in the playoffs where, he's not exactly winning, and he obviously had that mishap in the first round of the playoffs where he couldn't quite seal the deal and ended up losing in a playoff. But he's still playing consistent enough where I could see him not winning an event and still end up winning the Cup.
Yeah, shout-outs for me. First, Rafael Nadal, our tennis expert, Tejas Prasad, called it last week, but Rafael Nadal wins the U.S. Open final in straight sets over Kevin Anderson, 6-3, 6-3, 6-4. So congratulations to him. His 3rd U.S. Open championship and his 16th major all-time, one of the all-time greats. Shout out to Tracy McGrady. Forgot to call him out last week, but he was inducted into Pro Basketball Hall of Fame last week. He had a good speech, so check that out if you didn't. But again, Tracy McGrady, one of my favorite athletes watching growing up as a Houston Rockets fan, 7-time All-Star, 2-time All-NBA first team, 3-time All-NBA second team, 2-time scoring champ, most improved player. So a great career, unfortunately cut short due to injuries, and would have liked to see him and Yao get to a championship. I truly believe that they would have gotten there in 2009 if they didn't get hurt. But that is the past, and T-Mac is a well-deserved Hall of Famer. Yeah, shout out to T-Mac. And final shout out is to Atlanta FC. So they had 70,425 people attend their match yesterday against Orlando City in that new Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. It's an all-time MLS record. So again, the people that don't think soccer can work in the U.S., look at Atlanta FC and what they did yesterday. So I want you guys to visit our website, TwoNatesOnSports.com. Also like us on Facebook at TwoNatesOnSports. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music, where you'll get a notification as soon as we release our new episodes. You can also email us with any suggestions or comments at TwoNatesOnSports@gmail.com. I want to thank Evan so much for coming on again.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Nathan will be back next week, and we'll talk to you guys then.